Holly.
I'm Leslie.
And we would be dead. Leslie.
Hey, Holly.
Hey, Fiends. Well. I hope all of you guys out there have enjoyed our best holiday hits.
Yes.
That was fun to go back through everything we've done.
Yeah.
For the holidays. Guys, we decided to take a little Christmas break this year. I think we earned it. So we gave you some of our very favorite episodes that we've done over the years at Christmas time. And honestly, there are so many more. We have a ton of holiday material, and there's a ton more for us to mine, but we just took a little regroup this year. But you know what? We couldn't stay away altogether.
No, we could not.
We had to squeeze in one brand new seasonal horror for you all. And if you're looking for more of the mythological stuff, go find Elves. To this day, it is one of my favorite episodes we've ever done. Mm-hmm. Because we rebroadcasted it last season. This year, I think we did Santa. Yeah. But Elves is so good.
I know.
We may still rebroadcast that just again because I love that one.
So good.
But this week, we bring you a pretty heavily requested one. And since it occurred on Christmas Eve, 1945, this story is often thought of during the holidays. For those of you who haven't figured it out or didn't bother to read the title, this week we're covering the disappearance of the Sodder children, or the death of the Sodder children, depending on what you have chosen to believe. Because we still don't really know.
I think I know.
I think I know too, but I think we know different. I think we always do. In the 79 years since 5 of the 10. Can you imagine?
No.
Ugh. 5 of the 10 Sodder children disappeared during the fire that destroyed their home. No one can say for sure what happened to them. And it has driven devoted true crime fans into the deepest of rabbit holes. And I don't know if you've ever spent a couple weeks crawling around in rabbit holes like I just did, and like I think Leslie just did.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But if you haven't, let me tell you, it does a real number on your complexion.
It does.
The damp conditions and lack of light make you pretty pale.
Yeah.
And clammy.
Yeah.
Ugh, nobody wants to be clammy. It's really just a terrible combination. Yeah, I have that right there in my writing. Unless you're an actual clam. Great minds. And happy clams.
Sure.
You know, happy as a clam. I don't want one.
I don't want to be a clam.
I don't want to eat a clam either. But I'm glad that they're doing well.
Oh, yeah. They're thriving.
Good for them. And the moisture that they enjoy.
Yeah.
Anyway, I personally tried to bring a little color back into my cheeks, but nothing seemed to work. I guess I could go back to just sleeping and drinking water or attempt this mythological activity called relaxing.
Mm-hmm.
I can't trust that. You know what I mean? But I'd rather try a super secret ingredient, like a quick fix. Those are way more reliable than anything else,
absolutely.
Right? And I've been hearing whispers as of late about a precious ingredient that could give us exactly what we want. I hear that all I need are just a few shiny drops of
validation, a hill worth dying on.
That one brought the Christmas cheer.
Yeah.
I liked it.
I felt it. Ooh.
I know, you were had a festive heart today.
I just love it so much.
I love validation too. I hope we get some for Christmas.
Yeah.
I hope we get some under the tree, in our stockings, in the comments. All of that would be great.
All I want for Christmas is validation.
I hope we put that in every social media post this week. Because I love it.
Just opening a box and there's light coming out, but it's just, yeah.
That would honestly be perfect. It's all I need. And best of all, Leslie, our fiends can give us this beautiful gift totally free of charge.
Throw the gifts out.
Mm-hmm.
How?
But how, you must be asking yourself if you threw away all your gifts. Well, I will tell you. Simply head on over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating and or a friendly review. It really is the only way to move this podcast forward. Ratings and reviews equal attention, attention equals support, and support equals more and better content for all of you. Great. Yeah. But if you just can't wait for more We Would Be Dead in your life, and who could blame you, don't worry, you don't have to. You can support us over on Patreon. We're in sync this week. There, for just a few dollars a month, you will gain access to our entire catalog of 30-minute horror movies, special mini-sodes, little extras, our weekly after show, Host Mortem, which is available in both video and audio formats. Maybe you want to see our faces. Maybe we scared you off by saying we crawl around in rabbit holes. Both are okay. You'll also get a special gift in the mail from us, the opportunity to participate in some giveaways, merch deals, an on-air toast dedicated just to you, and more. We have more exclusive content in the new year in the works for our beloved patrons, but if you have anything else you'd like to see or hear, never hesitate to let us know. In all honesty, we are here thanks to our patrons, so come on over and be part of the We Would Be Dead family. It's Christmas.
It's Christmas time.
Let's be together as a family.
Yeah.
Love it. And if all of that is a little too much for you, you can simply follow us on social media. We are at Would Be Dead Pod anywhere and everywhere you get your content. You can like our posts, share our posts, and share our posts.
I love that one.
That is a good one. You can leave us a comment, post about your favorite episode. Engagement is good. Do it as much as you can. You can let us know you're listening, tell a friend, tell a neighbor, tell your favorite subpar electrician. Sure, he might not be the best at wiring, but he can mix a drink. What's his name or her name?
Paul.
Right away. We got it. That's it. Then your friends and Paul can become fiends, and we can all hang out together. We're not going to let him fix anything, but he can hang out.
Sure.
Yeah. Mixing drinks, not fixing things.
No.
You'll see why I say that later.
Oh, boy.
And I think that's all I have in the way of news before we begin. Leslie, do you have anything else to add?
Well, no.
Oh.
No.
All right, then.
Mm-hmm.
On with the show. It is Christmas Eve, 1945, in the little town of Fayetteville, West Virginia. At the time, Fayetteville was the home to a little under 1,500 people, most of them members of hardworking middle-class families. 1945 had been a year of great change. President Roosevelt died in office, the concentration camps were liberated, orally administered penicillin changed the landscape of modern medicine, ballpoint pens were introduced to the United States, atomic bombs were dropped on Japan, and World War II finally came to a close.
So are you just taking my job now?
You didn't do that this week. You did a different thing.
This is what I do, Holly.
I think you've already...
I'll just get rid of these papers.
Is that what you did for this week? Is it? Leslie.
It wasn't.
No.
No.
Have you probably already done 1945?
Probably.
Yeah. We did a quickie. The Sodder family lived on the outskirts of town in a 2-story, 5-bedroom, A-frame farmhouse. It says 5 bedrooms. The layout is a little weird. We will talk about it in a little bit. The Sodders were a big family consisting of parents George and Jennie and their 10 children.
Yes, girl.
Woo! Here's the children. I'm going to list them off for you. John, who was 22. Joe, who was 20. Marion, who was 19. George Jr., who was 16. Maurice, who was 14. Martha, who was 12. Louis, who was 9, Jennie, female junior, who was 8, Betty, who was 5, and Sylvia, who was just 3. Italian Catholics can really fill a room. And we go into this more later, but that whole area was basically populated by Italian immigrants. It was like a pocket. It was like South Jersey and West Virginia.
Yeah.
Their house was a little over 3 miles outside of the town of Fayetteville. And it was situated on a nice-sized piece of land that had a big garden, chickens, and cows.
Love it.
So like a farm light,
Yeah.
basically.
That's all you need.
It is all you need. And at the time, it was a huge advantage because being able to grow your own food and source your own milk and eggs was really valuable because rationing happened during World War II. So, and they had 10 kids to feed.
Yeah.
Lordy. Speaking of which, most American families had been touched by the war, and the Sodders were no exception. All but one of the children still lived at home under the same roof, and all but one of their children was getting ready for a cozy and joyful Christmas together. But 20-year-old Joe had been away at war since 1942, and though he was due home soon, he hadn't been able to make it there in time for Christmas. So Joe enlisted at 17 and shipped away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I believe if you have, parental consent at 17, you can join the Army.
What about John?
He did not go.
What was his 22-year-old ass doing?
Not warring.
Ridiculous.
He was home working and doing other stuff.
I think there was 8 other children that could have been home doing other stuff.
Yeah, well, he didn't want to go to war, thanks.
Did he have I guess he had a choice then?
Or, it doesn't say why he didn't go, but he could have had, bad vision or a limp, too, and, not been able to go. So, we don't...
All left feet.
He was born with 2 left feet and another left foot.
Yeah.
Terrible for war.
Yeah, for sure.
So they were like, you should stay home. Yeah. And he was like, awesome.
Got it.
Don't quote me on that. While the rest of the family would miss Joe, the Sodders were so grateful he had made it out alive, and they knew they would celebrate a little bit extra that year anyway. With 22-year-old not warring guy.
Sure.
Coming from an Italian family myself, and Leslie, you can confirm this too, I can tell you that Christmas Eve was always a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
We may not have done the 7 fishes, but there was always a big party with lots of food and music and presents that just couldn't wait until the next day.
Yeah.
The Sodders celebrated, but they're a little more austere than we would have been. They had a rather typical day that year. The 2 oldest boys that were home, so not war boy, John and George Jr., had worked with their father all day. George Sr. owned a trucking company that transported dirt and locally mined coal. So they were up driving around dirts with their dad.
Were they were real Italians?
Yeah, off the boat Italians. George immigrated himself.
Not like American Italians.
No, George came from Italy when he was 13. So the kids were born in America, but and actually Jennie was a first-generation American too. Well, she wasn't even born in America, so she was an immigrant as well.
Yeah. Okay.
So they were just working hard and trying to be successful. 19-year-old Marion also worked, again.
Yep.
And she worked at the counter of a local 5 and dime. Jennie and the remaining children did household chores, cared for the animals, and prepared for the holiday. By dinner time, everyone was at home, and the night was bitterly cold, but the house and the mood were festive and warm. Marion had saved her 5 and dime money, and before she came home that evening, she was able to buy brand new toys for her 3 little sisters, Martha, Jennie Jr., and Betty.
Love it.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
I kind of feel bad for her 9-year-old brother, Louis.
Yeah.
Oh, is he chopped liver?
Well.
She's like, this is for the girls and only the girls.
Well.
I guess. Maybe he had just been working on the farm and was considered a man at that point.
Yeah, I think that was a thing then.
Somebody get Louis a whiskey and his slippers. It's Christmas Eve, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
He was like, I don't need any of that shit. I gotta lay down.
All I want for Christmas is someone to rub these damn feet.
I gotta put up my dogs. He's just like a very small old man. He's not even the oldest kid at all. They were like teenage boys and they were 9 years old. Wait, and one of the girls that got toys was 12.
I don't know. Yeah, but girls need things.
Not Louis. He just needed a break. After dinner, the Georges, both senior and junior, and the eldest brother John were, as I mentioned, exhausted. They'd been trucking. After dessert was served, they went straight to bed. George Sr. went to his bedroom on the 1st floor, and the boys went to their bedroom on the 2nd floor, which is also referred to as the attic because it is, in fact, the top of the house.
Gotcha. It's an attic.
Yeah. I mean, it is the 2nd floor. There are 3 rooms, but it is also conventionally an attic. Yeah, because there's nothing above them.
Yeah.
But it is a full floor with 3 bedrooms. The 2 oldest brothers shared the center bedroom, which was at the top of the stairs. And then on either side of the stairway, there's a hallway. It splits off. There's a hallway on either side. And on the end of either hallway is another bedroom. And the rest of the kids shared those 2 bedrooms, except for little Sylvia, who slept with her parents in their room.
Okay.
But at this point, the only people who had gone to bed were the older boys and Dad. All of this is important, especially the layout of the house. So underline that in your brain book. Back to the festivities. Downstairs, Marian gave her little sisters their presents. They were so excited. Brand new toys were a really big deal in a big family like theirs. I imagine that those kids saw a lot of hand-me-downs. 10 kids, you're getting somebody else's stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Marian was both proud and happy to be able to give them such a good Christmas.
Good. Maybe that's why she got them the gifts, because maybe they always got her hand-me-downs.
Oh, maybe. That's a good point. I like that.
Yeah.
And Lewis was like, get me a cigar.
Yeah.
I'm not going to give up that image. It's too good.
Maybe John got something, you know? You don't know.
He got not being at war.
Yeah.
And that was a
he
gift.
passed that on to his 9-year-old brother.
You too, sir, are not at war.
Luckily, you also have flat feet.
I gotta go to bed. It's 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
But by 10 o'clock, Jennie and Sylvia were ready to go to bed. So that's mom and youngest child.
Okay.
The 3 younger girls, 14-year-old Maurice and 9-year-old old man Lewis, were having way too much fun. So they begged their mom to let them stay up just a little longer. 19-year-old Marian said she would stay up with them. Mom could go to bed. Jennie smiled and said that as long as they closed up the house and did the rest of the bedtime chores, she guessed they could stay up a little longer. It was Christmas Eve.
Cool.
Then Jennie scooped up Sylvia, reminded the boys to make sure the chicken coop was locked and the cows were securely in the barn. And then she said someone had to lock the doors, close the curtains, and turn off the Christmas lights before they all went to bed. And I'm sure she reminded them that Santa was on his way, so they shouldn't sleep in front of the Christmas tree before winking at Marian and heading off to bed. I made that part up because it feels a lot nicer, but that's what I would have done.
The Christmas witch is coming.
Instead, she was like, La Befana will sweep you out the door!
Yeah.
And Lewis was like, that's why I don't want gifts.
Yeah. I'm good.
Yeah, I'm not at war.
Yeah.
2.5 hours later, Jennie awoke with a start. She looked around. You know how when something wakes you up but you can't tell what it is, you kind of have to take stock for a minute? I hate it too, because you're like, oh, it's probably a murderer ghost.
Yeah.
So she took stock for a minute. She saw that Sylvia was asleep in her cot, which she figured like Sylvia had made a noise, but she didn't. And she listened for a minute and couldn't hear anything, so she figured something else must have woken her up. And then the phone rang.
Ooh.
Yeah. And this is an old-timey rotary phone on the wall downstairs.
Yeah.
Or she's downstairs in her husband's office. So it has that loud bell that rings.
Yeah.
It was past midnight on Christmas Eve, though, and all her family was at home. Who on earth would have been calling them?
Maybe it's Joe.
Maybe. It would be nice if it was. I would have thought that too. I would have been like, it's Joe from war, or it's Joe from war.
Yeah.
Either way, I have to answer the phone. She padded into her husband's office, where the family's one and only wall-mounted rotary phone lived, and picked it up. Hello, Jennie said. And on the other end, she heard voices, people laughing, glasses clinking, the general background noise of a party. And a few seconds into the din of a party, she heard a woman say, hello. And then she asked to speak to a man Jennie did not know. Jennie was like, there is no that guy here. Then the woman laughed strangely and hung up.
Do you think she was speaking Italian?
No.
Like Jennie?
No, I don't think she was speaking Italian, although it would be more fun if she was.
Would she have had like a deep accent though? Like first?
No, because they were teenagers. She might have had a little bit.
She definitely had an accent then.
This woman was like,
Buon
Buon Natale!
Yeah. And her getting like I could just see her getting like agitated.
Come stai? They were like, no, it's 12:30.
I don't think she was just like, okay, ciao, Bella.
Yep. No. She was like, what the fuck was that? But she assumed, like all of us would, that it was someone who had like too much to drink at a Christmas Eve party and called the wrong number. Then she started to walk back to bed. And as Jennie did so, she noticed that the kids didn't do the things she had asked.
What?
Because they never do.
Yeah.
The curtains were still open, the lights were still on, and Marian was asleep on the couch. Also, at first she thought this was a little weird because her kids had stayed up past her before and they're always pretty responsible. But then she thought, it is Christmas Eve. They were playing with their toys. Lewis probably had a couple whiskeys and Marian fell asleep. So it's fine. She shook her head, closed the curtains, shut off the Christmas lights in the living room. That we find out later there are other Christmas lights on in the house, but she shut off like the main ones. And checked the door. Yep, still open.
Ugh.
I know. So she locked it. It wasn't like the kids to leave the house in such a state, but you know what? Whatever. After securing the house, she sleepily walked back to bed and quickly fell back asleep, which didn't last long. An hour later at 1:30, Jennie woke up again, and this time she knew why rather quickly. A loud thump had woken her up. It sounded as though someone had dropped a baseball on the roof, then it rolled off and fell to the ground, which was a strange occurrence at that hour, but honestly, it could have been anything.
Like Santa.
Yeah, could have been Santa, or birds, or an acorn, or raccoons, or a bird and a raccoon fighting over an acorn, whatever, with Santa.
Sure.
Still, she was up now, and so she needed to at least walk around and see if anything happened. You know how when you hear a sound, you're like, it's probably fine, but I have to look.
Right.
First, that weird phone call happened, and now this.
Mhm.
This is a weird night. She felt kind of jumpy. But she didn't get far, because as soon as she sat up in bed and rubbed her eyes, she could tell that something was wrong this time. It smelled funny, and smoke was pouring in from under the bedroom door.
Ooh.
Panicked, Jennie ran out into the living room, and from the living room, she could see straight through into her husband's office. And there was fire. Flames spread over the wall where the phone wires were, and the room was engulfed in thick black smoke. It was the smell of smoke that she was smelling when she woke up. It was thick, and the fire was spreading very fast. Jennie ran back into her bedroom and woke up her husband. She told him there was a fire and they all needed to get out fast. She grabbed baby Sylvia then and ran to wake up Marion on the couch, all while yelling to the other kids to run outside because there was a fire, and then ran out onto the lawn with the baby and the eldest. George then ran to the stairs, where he screamed up for the children to get down there and fast. Fire, he shouted. John and George Jr. yelled back, and he heard them running out of their room. Figuring that either the other children were right behind them or that the boys were getting their siblings before running out the door, George ran outside into the freezing night to check on who had already made it out. He saw Jennie, Marion, and little Sylvia standing there on the lawn. And then shortly after, George Jr. and John came flying out behind them. Their hair was singed and their clothing smelled of smoke, so fire had reached up high.
Yeah.
And then, nothing. Nobody else was coming. And there are 5 other children. Where were the other kids? George ran back inside. The other children had been asleep in the attic, and he knew that he had to get them out. But by the time he fought his way back through the living room, he was met with a wall of flames. The stairwell was completely engulfed. He tried to run up, but he couldn't get past it. The 2 eldest boys had run out first because, remember, their bedroom was right at the top of the stairs.
Oh, yeah.
But now there was no way down or up. George ran back out and said, I can't get the kids. I don't know what's happening. There's fire. As soon as she heard this, Jennie ran back into the house and into the smoky office to try and use the phone. She thought, well, we have to call the fire department. Remember, there's no 911. But the phone was dead. There was no way to call for help, and even if there had been, help was not so easily gotten. This was long before the days of 911 or any emergency response, or even firefighters that were on call and at the ready 24 hours a day. In perfect conditions, that night they would have had to call the fire chief, who then would have to contact individual volunteer firefighters, one of whom had to be able to drive the truck, and then gather them all together and head over to the Sodder home. So this is a phone tree system that they had. On a normal night, this would have been lengthy and a little difficult at that hour. But this was Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
Knowing there was nothing more she could do in the house, Jennie ran back out onto the lawn. George tried to think fast. So you're problem solving at this point. You're like, how else do I get in? How else do I get in or get them out? What do I do? He hoped that the flames had not reached the children's bedrooms. George, panicking, began doing anything he could to get to those children. First, he ran to fetch the ladder that he always kept propped up to the side of the house. But it was gone, strangely. That ladder had been there every day. They never moved it, and for some reason, it's not there. It seemed as though someone had stolen the ladder. Bewildered, George then thought, okay, recalibrate. What do we do next? He told the boys to go get the trucks that he had parked in the driveway, which was on the side of the house. He said, get the trucks, pull them up right to the front of the house under the windows. We'll climb onto the roof of the truck, then hop over to the roof of the house and try to get in the windows to the kids, which is a good idea. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
But the trucks wouldn't start.
Oh my
Neither
God.
one. The boys tried and tried and tried. The engine wouldn't turn over. They had worked earlier that day to move dirt around, though, so why weren't they working now? George then ran to a water barrel they kept in the front yard, something they filled with rainwater and used for gardening and feeding the cow or watering the cows and such. And it was always there and it was always full, thinking that maybe he could at least extinguish a little bit of the fire, enough to get up there and just get to them, anything. He knew he couldn't put everything out, but maybe he could do just enough. But the barrel was frozen completely solid.
Ooh.
Yep. This was unbelievable. And I mean that in the most literal, way that word can be used. Like, it's hard to even believe that many things can go wrong. Now, I mentioned this part of town was rural, but I neglected to say that it bordered on downright remote. It's not as though they had close neighbors who heard them yelling and ran right outside as soon as they could, or they could start bringing their hoses over or anything like that, or even a busy highway filled with cars that were going by that they could flag down. No, it was dark and cold and quiet. Marion was sent to run to the closest neighbor's house. So she ran across her little baby farm and to the closest neighbors and banged on their door. And they woke up and let her in, and they tried to call the Fayetteville Fire Department, but they couldn't even get an operator to pick up, because at this point, you picked up your phone and you talked to an operator at a switchboard who then connected you. You weren't really dialing much.
Yeah.
And they couldn't even do that. I can't imagine feeling that helpless. It must have been the worst
my God, this
feeling.
Is sickening.
It's everybody's actual horror movie nightmare. You can't, there's nothing worse. But the neighbors are good. They're we're just going to keep trying. We're just going to keep calling. Eventually, somebody's going to see the shit light up and they're going to connect us. It has to work. And eventually, a car did drive by. And seeing a huge fire and people standing on the lawn, they pulled over. The Sodder said, we still have kids in there. We can't get a hold of the fire department. What are we going to do? And the car was like, I'm going to go into town to the tavern. It's still open. It's not yet 2. People are celebrating. I will call the fire department. They're like, thank you, guy.
Yeah.
So he speeds off. People are still at the tavern celebrating. It's still open. Thank God. He runs in, uses their phone, and after a little bit, he does talk to the fire chief.
Okay, good.
Hero. Not quite. I mean, this guy's definitely a hero, but that was only a fraction of the battle they faced.
I know.
45 minutes after some of the Sodder family ran out into the cold, the entire house was engulfed in flames. It had gone up like a tinderbox, just done. And the fire department was nowhere in sight. George tried to scale the walls of the house barefoot and without gloves. He was just trying to Spider-Man his way.
I also would be doing
Same.
that.
I would have absolutely done the same thing. He was crazy with fear and walking a tightrope of grief. He scratched and clawed. He even broke a window in the process and cut up his arm. Soon, fire was pouring out the windows and flames were coming out of the roof. Well, that escalated quickly, didn't it? There's no denying that the Sodder house went up in flames remarkably fast. And at this point, some of you may be thinking, yeah, a little too fast if you ask me, while squinting your eyes and stroking your beard, be it real or imaginary.
Yeah. Well, I also, I don't know. Do you have, are you going to tell us the statistics of how fast houses go up in flames?
Not exactly, but I am going to explain why it happened as fast as it did.
Okay.
There are plenty of reasons.
Okay. Because I also feel 45 minutes is forever too, sometimes.
So 45 minutes to consume a whole entire house, to almost, it's burnt.
Yeah.
Is fast for a modern home, for houses of a certain construction. So I get the impulse to be suspicious because this is not a small house. After all, you would be hard-pressed to burn down a whole modern house in less than an hour unless you blew it up with a meth lab, poured gasoline all over the place, ran around with a flamethrower, or all of the above. But that wasn't the case. When people say, boy, they sure don't build houses like they used to, they're right. But they're not always proving the right point. Houses really aren't built the same way they were in 1910, which is about when the Sodders' home was built. And that's for a reason. During the mid-1800s up until about the mid-1900s, a method for building residential homes called balloon construction became quite popular. And if you have one of these houses, you should never use the aforementioned phrase to brag. Balloon framing, quote, is a residential construction framing method that was popular in the United States from the mid-19th century until the mid-20th century. The method involves constructing the framing of the home with long, straight studs that run the full height of the building from foundation to roof. So straight up and down channels instead of floor by floor.
Okay.
Quote, at the time, balloon framing was a revolutionary development in residential construction. It replaced traditional timber framing, which was more time-consuming and required skilled craftsmen. Balloon framing allowed for quicker, cheaper construction, which was especially beneficial during a time of rapid population growth in cities. So, it's cheaper and easier. But as you might suspect, it is not without its problems. The term balloon comes from the large void space in the center of the house, big empty channel, which in the right conditions would act as an enormous chimney. Quote, one of the main concerns is the risk of fire. With the studs running the full height of the building and little to no insulation, a fire in the basement or lower levels could easily spread up the wall cavities because there is empty space all the way up the walls between the exterior framing and the interior drywall, and just go straight up those spaces. Balloon houses also weren't known for having much insulation, so there was just oxygen to suck the fire straight up the house.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
What fire needs is oxygen, and it's going to find it and it's going to go to it. And if you give it a direct path, it's going to take it. In regard to commercial spaces, quote, this risk was recognized early on, and building codes were put in place to require the use of fire stops between the floors to help prevent the spread of the fire. So they knew that between floors, you had to put like metal or a platform or something, or fire would just race straight up. And they did that in big commercial buildings, but they didn't do it in private homes. And homeowners were not notified of the risks, so nobody knew this was a possibility. In addition to this, the first home smoke detectors were not installed until 1965, and there were no regulations requiring them to be installed in homes until 1980. So there's just no fire safety.
Yeah.
And no knowledge. Nobody really knew they had to be safe. Now, obviously, I'm not telling you all of this for funsies. The Sodders' home, which I believe had been instructed in the early 1900s, the 1900s, if you will, was in fact a balloon house. There was a large empty channel in the center and empty channels that ran through the walls of the house. A fire starting in the lower levels, even in the basement, would have been able to take advantage of this drafty airflow and race to the roof in a matter of seconds to minutes. This house was inadvertently built to burn real fast. Now, our houses don't have that.
Yeah.
The floors are completely separate, and so it would take much more time for them to find different rooms and to get up everywhere. That's why a lot of times modern fires, people can get out a little more easily.
Okay.
Not this. Am I saying this definitely wasn't arson? No, of course not. We haven't explored the scene yet, and it would be nuts of me to make assumptions like that. What I am saying, though, is that before you quickly latch onto a nefarious theory, you should know that a lot of these types of houses burned to the ground. And by this time, they were already a known hazard. Okay. This is in the last year of people using balloon construction just for that purpose.
Okay.
Perhaps the general population wouldn't know, but detectives, firefighters, and anyone who enforced construction codes would have been able to tell you this. Back to the Sodders. As it turned out, the passing motorist did eventually reach the fire chief by phone, as we said. But the chief couldn't get a hold of any volunteers, not a single one. And at the time, all the firefighters were volunteers, so that's no firefighters. But we had the chief on board, right?
Sure.
That's good, we got one. So he must have been able to do something. And I guess maybe he would have if he knew how to drive the truck.
Girl, I would figure that shit out.
That's what I thought at first, too. The chief himself couldn't drive the fire truck, which feels kind of insane. The chief doesn't usually drive the truck, but they typically have to know how to be chief.
Right.
You have to be an advanced fire guy.
Yeah.
But I guess if you're desperate and you live in a small town and the guy's like, well, I'll be the chief. They're like, run the phone tree. Thanks. And my first thought was exactly yours. How could that be? People are dying. As it turns out, it's pretty hard to drive one of those trucks.
Yeah. I did know that. I did.
Did you?
Yeah.
Because I didn't know. I was like,
but I would figure it out.
Get in the car. I know. Just drive it. In 1945, fire trucks kind of looked like an elongated version of the red Hallmark truck with a ladder on the side.
Yep.
So cute. And I'm kind of envisioning a little wreath on the front for Christmas.
Get out.
They were not nearly as intimidating or large as fire trucks are today, but they did require special training to operate. The trucks had limited visibility because they had lots of stuff going on and they were a little bit bigger. They also had a double clutch transmission. I don't know anything about cars, but what I do know is that is different than the transmission and shifting in a normal civilian vehicle at the time. So you wouldn't know how to change gears in a fire truck, even if you could drive a normal car.
Mm-hmm.
They also had less efficient brakes and were heavier than a normal car. So you had to know how to decelerate the car smoothly with the transmission to get it to stop. Also, trucks back then had no power steering, which meant that at lower speeds, the driver would have to muscle their way through turning the car.
I mean, I wouldn't be going at a slow speed.
I wouldn't either. I'd be flying down that freaking road. But if you're not used to what that feels like, not having power steering, I can tell you firsthand, it feels like a fucking horror movie.
Yeah.
I drove a 1969 Cadillac when I first got my license, which is very cool, but also old and different. And at one point, the power steering went out when I was driving down the highway. Suddenly, I had no control of the direction my car was going in, and it was like lead. It was so hard to turn the wheel, and I'm like a 17-year-old girl, so I definitely wasn't doing very well. All I could do was just stop. I could just coast it to where it would be and just stop it. That was all. So in short, if you didn't know what you're doing, that fire truck could have been a very cute little death trap. I mean, as fire chief, you want to hope he'd be like, I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah.
But no, he should have known how to drive the truck, and I'm going to die on that hill anyway. So.
Yeah. It all would have been too late, though, anyway.
Most likely, yes.
Yeah.
However you slice it, though, the situation was a farce. Like, you couldn't have even written a comedy of errors that crazy. It's nuts that everything went wrong. Children were most likely dying. And, start knocking on doors, Chief, to see if anyone will help. At this point, you just need someone. Wake up the truck drivers. Go to their house and bang, bang, bang. Collect hoses from the fire station. Drive over to the house in your car and run them from the neighbors' homes. I mean, find a car you can drive. Start a bucket brigade from the neighbor's well or whatever you can find. Do something. Get a car that will drive and park it under the windows and do the whole climbing thing they wanted to do at first. Or you have a ladder. There's so much that they could have done. But the chief was like,
I can't drive the fire truck.
I have to wait for a driver.
Yeah.
He also could have called the next town over and just kept calling fire departments until he found someone who could drive a truck. But no, what he said was, I have to wait. I have to wait until I can get hold of a driver, and then we will come. Which is the weirdest fucking priorities I've ever heard of. But literally, they could have done anything, and anything would have been better than fumbling around for 7 hours.
Ugh.
Which is how long it took for them to get to the Sodders' home.
Awful.
7 hours.
Oh my God.
I cannot find an excuse for that. I can't find it. Tell more people until you find someone to help. Just start driving over.
I know.
What? Why would you be like, gotta hang out?
I know. Anybody would have been like, wait, there's like children inside this house? Like,
I have a ladder.
Go.
I have a bucket. I have a hose. I have something. I can come and help. But the chief just sat there. I mean, to me, he is the link in the chain that's broken. You didn't call anybody. You didn't do anything. What the fuck, man? I know a few people wouldn't answer. My theory is that it was Christmas Eve and he was kind of drunk.
Yeah, probably.
I can't prove that. That's just me making a speculation. But like, there has to be a reason that you just sat on your hands. So anyway, 7 hours later, on Christmas morning, a fire truck finally arrived. And one would hope that they were all fucking ashamed of themselves, or at least totally frantic. And one of the firefighters was Jennie Sodder's brother.
Oh.
Which I would have been like, why weren't you at my house banging on the door and telling me that my nieces and nephews were dying?
Do you think that they were also having trouble, though, like calling out? Because if they were having an issue at the one house.
According to everything I read, no one would answer.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know. I mean, the fire chief might have had more direct. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, and remember, these people are outside of Fayetteville. They're like 3 miles outside of town, and he would be in the city. So perhaps connections were a little stronger. But my thought is, like, you have to know where some of these people, or any people that could possibly help, live. Get in your car that you can drive and go to their house.
Yeah.
Anyway, the chief came with them in the truck he couldn't drive, and he was like, sorry, guys, I had to wait for the driver. And they were like, barefoot on their lawn, singed and bleeding. Like, oh, really? You had to wait?
Ugh.
And let us take a moment to just digest how traumatic that must have been
I
for the
know, that's
remaining
all
Sodder
I'm
family.
thinking about.
Right?
It's awful.
They went through the worst thing ever, 7 hours of panicking while they watched their house burn to ashes and rubble, because there's nothing left of the house at this point. It is leveled. There's no way you come out of that okay. Just no way at all. They're not going to be rational. They're not going to be all right. I would have been out for blood. By the time the firefighters got there wasn't anything they could do. The house had been reduced to ash and rubble, all of which had collapsed in on itself into the basement. But of course, the Sodders wanted what they assumed would be, at the very least, the partial remains of their beloved children. For the next 3 hours, just 3 hours, mind you, firefighters, including the chief, combed through the rubble. And when they emerged, they had strange news. They said that nothing of the children remained. Not a bone, not a button, not a tooth, nothing. They said the children must have been completely reduced to ash in the fire, but that George and Jennie should leave everything exactly as it was because there was still an investigation they could possibly do. They said they were very sorry, but now what they needed to do was try and figure out how the fire started in the first place. So, without any sleep, they brought the remaining Sodders, in a state of shock, into the police station for questioning. Really? And that's when things started to get weird. In the first round of interviews with the police, the family pretty much laid out the story of that night exactly the way I just told it to all of you, with one inconsistency. George Jr. said that his younger brothers and sisters, that he saw the kids as he was fleeing the house. He said he tried to wake them up. He saw the kids, couldn't wake them up, and had to keep running. Okay. Then in a subsequent interview, George amended this statement and said that he had not in fact seen them. He said that he had seen them because he was ashamed he didn't go back. He was too scared. I think that is so fucking sad.
I know.
It's okay, dude. You were in a fire. Like, we get it.
Yeah.
Investigation-wise, the family stories did not have a lot for investigators to go on, but Jennie did say she saw the fire racing along the wall on the wiring for the telephone, which to the detectives indicated it was probably an electrical fire, which is logical. On December 26th, the local coroner held an inquest, which is a court process to determine the cause of death of an individual or individuals. The coroner will come to court, present their evidence as to why they think what they think, explain everything, and the inquest is presided over by a judge and jury. So after they say, here's what I think, the jury goes, okay, I agree or I don't agree, and then the judge rules yes or no. The coroner stated that the fire was due to faulty wiring and that the 5 Sodder children died of suffocation or fire and that their remains had been completely destroyed. The judge and jury accepted this as the likely explanation and the reports were filed. Case closed. Ish. That part. The Sodders were informed of the inquest's results. And those results are what is written on that police report to this day. Everything else that happens in this case does not affect that outcome. There was no evidence of an accelerant and nothing else to go on, but George wasn't buying this. He told the police that just a few weeks before the fire, he had an electrician out to the house to do a little repair, and that he had said, this electrician, that the house's wiring was fine. He said everything was stable. He saw nothing wrong with anything. Now, to me, that means there was an electrical problem, first of all. And second of all, this man did not check every wire in the entire house for no reason. There's no way.
Right.
But there was a problem. So to me, that is not a green flag. It is a red flag.
Yeah,
for sure. To George, I need to make it clear that at no point in time do I judge the Sodders for anything they think or say. They went through an unimaginable mess.
Right.
Cling on to your hope. I get it. In addition to that, George and Jennie told the investigators that as the house was burning, they could see lights on inside. Some Christmas lights and like hall lights and stuff were still on. And as far as they knew, if the problem had been electrical, wouldn't it have tripped the breakers and caused everything in the house to go out? Not necessarily. I don't think that one wire starting a fire would immediately, in those old houses, shut everything down. Modern homes, I'm pretty sure, yes, it would shut everything in that quadrant down for safety. I do not think that was the case yet in 1945. But it's a good question and a good assumption. I get it. And there were also a few details that smelled nefarious to both George and the detectives. Like, why wouldn't George's truck start? Where was the ladder they kept on the side of the house? And who called their house at 12:30 a.m.?
Yeah.
All of that hit just a little close to home for their liking. And there were other odd coincidences. Now, because it is the link in the chain that doesn't go anywhere else, that phone call was a wrong number. They reached the woman. She was like, I was at a party. I was drunk. I was trying to call my husband. I called the wrong number. I talked to her that night. It was me. I'm sorry.
Why was she at a party drunk without her husband?
I don't know. And maybe she was just lying.
Maybe.
We don't know, but that is what she said. Her phone was her number. The number she said she called from was the number that called them that night. We know that much. That's about it. But there's other weird things. Don't worry. Neighbors reported seeing a strange man on the Sodders' property on Christmas Eve, and this man walked onto their property and removed a block and tackle, something George hadn't even noticed at first. Since no one in the family had any idea this had gone on, it was declared a theft. Someone clearly was stealing it, and the neighbors said nothing. They weren't like, hey, what are you doing? No.
That's so weird.
Nope.
Wait, what did he steal?
A block and tackle, which is a pulley system you use for lifting things.
Oh, yeah. I have one of those.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I don't book it for you. But also, an entirely different person must have stolen the ladder because neighbors watched this guy run off with this thing, but they didn't see anyone take the ladder, and he wasn't carrying a ladder.
Yeah.
So what is happening? Why are they crawling with people? And the hits just keep on coming. When repairmen were sent out to the house to secure the phone and electrical wires, because you just had a fire, they got to go up to the poles and shut shit down. They discovered that the phone lines hadn't been burnt through. That wasn't why they couldn't make a phone call. They had been cut.
Oh.
And not inside the house, high up at the pole level.
Okay.
The fire couldn't have done that because nothing else up there had been touched. Strange. Very strange, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe someone did have it out for the Sodders. More investigation was warranted. But the fire chief and investigators held firm that the children were consumed by the fire. They're like, we'll look into why this happened, but this is how your kids died. The end. But George and Jennie weren't buying that anymore either, because now they had more questions. And wouldn't we all? That's weird. It was curious that if the children had never left the house, not a single trace of them remained. There had to be something, right? A local funeral director told Jennie that even during cremation, even during the cremation process, sizable bone fragments are left intact. It would be nearly impossible to completely reduce one whole human to powdery ash, let alone 5 of them.
Right.
So Jennie decided to do a little at-home science. I don't know if this was the wisest situation. Well, she did it wherever she was staying at the time. Obviously, she's not at home. So this is what she did. She put a pork chop on a tray and put it in the oven and turned it up to its maximum heat. She had been told that wood burned at 500 degrees Fahrenheit, and her oven went up that high. So she let the chop sit in the oven for hours. Whoever's house this was must have been very tolerant, because that would have been a smelly, smelly affair.
Or it might have smelled really good.
For a while, and then it smelled like burnt pork chop.
Yeah.
It charred and burned, and the meat turned to cinders, but even after hours and hours, that bone didn't go anywhere. It stayed. And Jennie was like, yep, they're right. I proved it with my science. Then there was the fact that the Sodders were all exiting the house screaming, and the children never made a sound. They didn't bang on the walls or doors. They didn't respond to the frantic calls. They didn't go to the windows and bang or try to open them. It seemed to the Sodders that if the kids had been trapped in a burning attic, they'd be panicking. They would have seen them or heard them or anything, but there was only quiet that night. No one had seen a single trace of them or heard anything. George, Jennie, and their remaining family had begun to suspect that the children had not, in fact, died in that fire because they weren't in the house at all when it happened.
Ooh.
I know. No one had tucked them in that night.
Right.
Marion had fallen asleep on the couch. No one saw the kids after they were left playing in the living room that evening. So who's to say they even went to bed? But there are a few more things when talking about the fire that we have to consider. First is the fact that there was virtually no training for fire investigators back then. It just didn't exist. They didn't tell you what to do at all. Basically, they were like, look around. All right. And there was no procedure. So there was no checklist of things you had to do when investigating a fire.
Yeah.
You just went there and saw what you could do.
There was no stop, drop, and rolling.
No, nothing. There was just nothing at all. Modern fire investigators have stated when looking at this case that the most they could have done or would have done was a cursory investigation, which certainly would not have turned up any evidence. Because remember, the house all collapsed into the basement. So all the contents, all the ash, all the stuff is packed into this basement space. You'd have to dig a lot.
That just sounds tedious.
And they were like, nothing's up here on the top. Guess there's nothing. Bye.
Yeah.
What a crazy thing to do. Then there's the fact that in reality, what was recorded and what the Sodders had been told seems to have been a little different. Early police reports are said to have stated in some places that they did find bone fragments. They just didn't want to tell the family because it was too ghoulish.
Oh.
None of this evidence was kept or cataloged, though, so we can't say whether it was true or false. And we can't say when they wrote that down because nothing is really dated well.
Mm.
And then we get to the actual science of cremation. So everybody's question when they're looking at this case is it possible? Could they have burned to ashes and that's it? Because it feels impossible, and it is.
Yeah.
Burning a body is tricky business, and most of what we think happens in that process is an assumption shaped by media portrayals and simplified language. In fairness, comparing the slow and continuous burning of a human body in a house fire to the conditions of a professional cremation is like comparing apples and horses. They kind of go together, but they're certainly not the same thing. What Jennie Sodder was told about cremation by this funeral directress was true. The whole body does not burn. However, the answers she got and the experiments she conducted were way too simple to accurately explain the possibilities. So here's a wiki roundup of professional cremation. And if the thought of this is triggering to you, like learning what happens when a human body is cremated, please skip ahead a little bit. Nobody's going to be offended, we promise. Right, Leslie?
I won't even know.
Yeah, that's true. We won't even know. Just skippity-doo-dah. First of all, bodies are not cremated by wood fire. So the temperature of burning wood has no effect on this. Cremation occurs in a cremator, which is not your average oven. A cremator is an industrial furnace that is able to generate temperatures of 871 to 982 degrees Celsius, which is 1600 to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, and they do get hotter.
Yeah, so that's hotter than 500 degrees.
Which is not even true. We'll get to that in a minute. But it is much higher than 500 degrees,
Yeah.
right? And this is all to ensure the disintegration of the body. Modern cremator fuels, and this goes back to then, include oil, natural gas, propane, and in Hong Kong, coal gas.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how they do that, but good for them. Cremators automatically monitor the interior to tell when the cremation process is complete, and they have a spy hole so the operator can see inside. Spy hole sounds weird. Don't say that. Just say window. Why do they call it that?
Spy hole.
Yeah.
They're spying.
It sounds weird. But it's not to be weird. It's just to make sure everything is going right. Like they're not sitting up or anything in there.
Well, it probably were like peephole sounds wrong. So spy hole.
Just say window.
It's a spy hole.
It's
not a window.
I guess it's a spy hole. Okay. The chamber where the body is placed is called a cremation chamber or retort, and is lined with heat-resistant refractory bricks. Refractory bricks are designed in several layers. The outermost layer is usually simply an insulated material like mineral wool, and inside is typically a layer of insulation brick, mostly calcium silicate in nature. Heavy-duty cremators are usually designed with 2 layers of bricks inside the insulation layer. So this is like for real science.
Yeah.
It's not just like a pile of wood. The body is generally required to be inside a coffin or a combustible container. The box containing the body is placed in the retort and incinerated at a temperature upwards of 2100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Mm-hmm.
It's friggin' hot. During the cremation process, the greater portion of the body, especially the organs and other soft tissue, is vaporized and oxidized by the intense heat. Gases released are discharged through the exhaust system. And I read something that I kind of like that said someone who watched a cremation, and in some places you are allowed to watch your loved one's cremation if you so choose, said that the human body does not burn like a normal orange fire. It's like multicolored, brilliant flames.
Yeah.
Which is really pretty,
Mm-hmm.
and I think kind of nice to know. So you're made of rainbows.
There you go.
Pretty nice.
And that's why we have a spy hole.
So we can see the rainbows.
Mm-hmm.
The time required for cremation varies from body to body. Obviously, everybody's not the same size. But with the average human body, it takes about 90 minutes. That's not long, but it's also a perfect situation. And I cannot stress this enough, that time only applies to this condition. Contrary to popular belief, the cremated remains are not just ashes, though, but they sure look like ashes, and that's by design. After the incineration phase is completed, quite a bit of bone fragments remain. And the thing is, there's a lot more bone left over than you think. Like if you Google this image, and we'll provide an image in our photo suite, it's like a whole tray of bones. It's not a little bit. Sometimes there's recognizable bones.
Yeah.
But like nobody wants a giant urn filled with a pile of bones. Okay, maybe some people want that, but most people don't. And so the cremation process isn't just the fire part. There is also a second part that involves something people don't love talking about, and that's breaking down what is left.
Right.
Quote, the dry bone fragments are swept out of the retort and pulverized by a machine called a cremulator, essentially a high-capacity, high-speed pulverizer, to process them into something that looks like ashes, or what we call cremains. This leaves the bone with a fine, sand-like texture and color. And it's not just bones they have to sift out sometimes. There may be melted lumps of metal from missed jewelry or casket furniture. There may be dental fillings and surgical implants. Metal survives. Any kind of metal, a button, a necklace, an earring, a filling, that survives the fire.
Mm-hmm.
And all these things are dealt with for you by cremators. Their job is a lot more than just oven monitor. And they are discreet when they do this to protect you from the traumatic middle phase of the process that is just a big tray of bones. It's much easier and kinder, though, to say that your loved one has been incinerated and their ashes were neatly placed in a vessel for you to do with what you feel would honor them most. That's what we want to hear.
Sure.
Right? This process cannot be replicated by a pork chop in an oven, obviously.
No.
Or even a long-burning house fire. Wood fires actually burn much hotter than 500 degrees also. I have no idea where Jennie got that information. Well, they can burn to like a couple thousand degrees. They can get very hot. Well,
probably from her brother's wife, sister-in-law over there. Their brother that didn't make it to the house in time.
Oh, boy.
Maybe that's where she's staying.
Maybe. I would be like, I have to keep you in my house.
Yeah.
I wasn't there. I have to do something.
Yeah.
Should I build you a house? Like buy you a house? What do you want 2 houses? What can I do? But anyway, while it's true that a house fire could burn as hot as 1,000 to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the heat isn't concentrated in one area and it doesn't disperse evenly.
Right.
Heat rises, so the hottest point of a house fire would be the highest point in the room where it's burning. And people don't usually lay on the ceiling. So contrary to like what your logical self is telling you, if you're on the ground where the fire started, that's not even the highest point. It's up above you. Under normal house fire conditions, significant remains are typically left behind. Even in big, scary house fires, they usually find at least, and this is a little bit gruesome, at least a torso.
Yeah, something.
So, and more than just a bone here and there. They usually find pieces of people. But this was not what we call a normal house fire in normal conditions either. Because of the way the Sodder house was constructed and the fact that the children slept in the attic, it is likely that they were in the hottest part of the house for the longest time. And after the supports kind of were disintegrated, the house would have collapsed in on itself because of the hollow space in the center and created an oven of coals that were buried in the basement. Very unique to this kind of fire. So there's no precedent. Nobody could be like, that's not what happens, because this is totally different. So could the bodies have been reduced to nothing? No, they couldn't have been. That doesn't happen. But they could have been significantly broken down and then spread out by the collapse, because that's like an explosion. Everything falls down. And then slowly dispersed and buried in the ash and collapse. So it could have been really hard to find the pieces of them that were left.
Sure.
What the most likely scenario is, according to science, if you believe the children were in there when the place burned down, is just that. The children were trapped in the uppermost bedrooms and died of smoke inhalation, probably relatively quickly, which is a blessing. Smoke inhalation deaths can occur a lot faster than you think. They could have been unconscious in as little as 2 minutes, and death would have followed shortly after. I know that's awful, but in this condition, it's kind of a blessing.
Yeah.
If this were the case, they never would have heard their parents or siblings yelling for them. They would have already been unconscious when they were. And that's why they didn't yell back or open the windows or run from their rooms or do anything. After that, their bodies would have remained in the hottest part of the fire until the house collapsed and then shifted, as I mentioned before, and then buried them in a tomb of coals.
Right. Ooh.
That's a lot. According to science, that would have been the situation.
Okay.
5 days later, but we're not dealing with science yet. God, no. 5 days later, on December 30th, the children's death certificates were signed. Without any proof, they just were like, probably this is what happened, so here we go. And the Sodders were beside themselves. Anybody would be. They knew in their hearts at this point, they really thought in their heart of hearts that their children were not dead. They had convinced themselves that somebody had taken them or they had ran.
Yeah.
Now, and also, against the advice of the fire chief, and who's going to follow his advice at this point, right? Who had told George to leave the property as is. He was like, don't touch anything so the state fire inspector can come back and have a look at it. Well, they've already signed the coroner's inquest and the children's death certificates. George's like, what the hell is left? So on the 30th, George got his work truck and dumped 5 feet of dirt over the ashy rubble that already was their home because Jennie couldn't bear to look at it any longer, and she wanted to plant a garden in her children's honor in the spring, something they could tend in their absence, which she did do, by the way. But after that, you can't investigate the site anymore.
Yeah.
It's done. It's closed for business. Not the wisest thing because perhaps the state fire investigator could have come in and done a better job, but we'll never know. And again, when you're not trustworthy, like this man hasn't been, why are you going to listen?
Right.
Further investigation of other factors, though, did continue, and a couple of mysteries were solved, like we found out who the woman that called was, and then a few more mysteries are tacked on for good measure. So first off, they found the ladder. It was at the bottom of an embankment just 75 feet from the house.
Weird.
And they were like, good enough for me. Nobody ever found out how it got there or why.
Right.
And they just didn't try to? I don't know.
Like it couldn't have fallen and like gone over there, you think?
I don't think so.
Mm.
That was like a big ladder.
Maybe she heard a loud sound.
Yeah, maybe
too?
it was the ladder falling over, but then there was no hill for it to tumble down or anything. I don't know how, but that's
Maybe
what
it
it
like
was.
hit and, it's like bouncing. Kind of.
Grew little tiny feet. I ran away.
But you know what I mean? Like a little bounce off the ground.
Maybe. I don't know. But nobody found out how it got there. We do know that it was removed from the property. That's about all. Second, police did catch the man who stole the Sodders' block and tackle. Good. And when they caught him, he admitted to it right away, and he claimed that he had been the one also to cut the phone line. He thought it was the power line, but denied having anything to do with the fire. However, no record identifying the suspect exists, so we don't know who this guy was or why he wanted to cut any of the utility lines to the Sodder house while just running away with a little thing. But that's what's written down, and they didn't look into it any further. They're like, good enough for me.
Wait, so sorry. So he thought he was cutting what?
The electric. He thought he was like going to have the lights go out in the house.
And this was the same guy that had...
He stole the block and tackle.
Yeah.
That's it. According to him. He was like, I stole the thing. And first I cut a line because I thought, I'm going to make it so they can't see inside, even though I'm outside. And then I ran away. The end.
Okay.
My thought is like maybe he used the ladder for something and then just like threw it.
Right.
He like got rid of it. Maybe he used the ladder to climb up to cut the power line, got rid of the ladder, came back, stole the block and tackle and left.
Oh, yeah. Maybe.
Possible. Also, I think that like if you look out on like electrical poles, a lot of times they have metal rungs in them that you can just climb up. But they were like, well, that's that.
Yeah.
Okay. Second, the police determined that the trucks that wouldn't start likely couldn't do so that night because it had gotten very cold.
Yeah.
And the boys' furious attempts to just keep trying to start it had flooded the engine. And so they just couldn't get it to start.
That's a thing that happens.
It is a thing that happens.
Yeah.
And I guess the trucks worked fine in the coming days. So they were like, nothing wrong with them now.
Yeah.
So like they don't have any damage. Or they just were like, I don't care. Either way, that is what the only explanation you'll ever see.
Okay.
And third, there definitely were people in the neighborhood that did not like the Sodders.
Oh, no.
Yeah. You see, George had some controversial political views. Well, they were controversial for the people he surrounded himself with. The Italian neighborhood.
Sure.
To explain, let's hit a brief wiki roundup. This has been thoroughly fact-checked, though, you guys. I mean, it is stated the same in every single retelling of the story. So I'm just going to give it to you. Don't worry. Quote, George Sodder was born with the name Giorgio Soddu in Tula, Sardinia, Italy in 1895. Or Soddu, S-O-D-D-U. So pronounce both these and then a U. In 1895, he immigrated to the United States 13 years later, so he's 13, with an older brother, not his parents, who went back home as soon as both boys had been cleared at the customs of Ellis Island. So he was by himself at 13.
Ooh.
For the rest of his life, George, as he came to be known, would not talk much about why he left his homeland. He never said why he left or why his brother left him, just that he was here.
That's pretty normal, though, for, like, men like that,
I guess, yeah, especially if it was traumatic. He probably just didn't want to.
and they're just kind of quiet. I don't know.
Yeah.
My friend has immigrant parents, and, like, when she talks about her father,
Mm-hmm.
like, and he came here as a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
that's just what it sounds like.
Fair enough. And
Like,
honestly, like, he didn't have to talk about that.
oh, yeah,
It's
yeah.
okay.
But just to say, like, that's just, like,
Yeah,
normal.
no,
Like,
it checks out.
even if there isn't anything, like, traumatic,
Right.
they're just like,
It's kind of not abnormal for the experience. I get what you're saying. But, through Ellis Island and stuff, he changed his name to George Sodder. That was not uncommon going through Ellis Island. They were like, how do we fix this name we can't pronounce? You're George.
Yeah.
And that was it. George eventually found work on the railroads in Pennsylvania, where he carried water and other supplies to workers. He's 13, remember, he can't really do much. After a few years, he took more payment work as a driver in Smithers, West Virginia. And then he built himself up until he was able to start his own trucking company. Again, it was a very immigrant thing to do. He really just put his nose down and worked until he built something for himself.
Well, and he also is only speaking Italian probably and trying to learn English.
Yep. Which he did with no help, most likely. Well, no, he was in a very Italian area, so there would have been other people that could kind of help him get by, which is probably why he stayed in the areas that he stayed in, because he could talk to people. So his trucking company initially was hauled filling dirt to construction sites, and later he started hauling coal mined in the region, so even better business. Jennie Cipriani, a storekeeper's daughter in Smithers, who had also immigrated from Italy in her childhood, married George in 1922. He walked into her family's store and saw her behind the counter and fell in love.
Aww.
Very cute. They met when they were very young and got married. The Sodders settled outside nearby Fayetteville, which had a large population of Italian immigrants, so they could talk to people, in a 2-story timber frame house 3 miles-ish north of town. In 1923, they had the first of their 10 children, so that's oldest 22-year-old flat-footed John. George's business prospered, and they became one of the, quote, most respected middle-class families around, in the words of one local official. However, George had strong opinions about many subjects and was not shy about expressing them. Sometimes this alienated other people. In particular, his strident opposition to Italian dictator Benito Mussolini had led to some strong arguments with other members of the immigrant community. They did not like this. The last of the Sodder children, Sylvia, was born in 1942. By then, their second oldest, Joe, who was 17, had left home to serve the military during World War II, which was pretty anti-Mussolini. So, the following year, Mussolini was deposed and executed. However, George's criticism of the late dictator had left some pretty hard feelings. In October of 1945, so just 2 months before the fire, a visiting life insurance salesman, so just knock, 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 want to buy some insurance, after being turned down by George, he was like, I do not want any insurance. He warned George that his house would go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. What?
That's wild.
Yep, and he attributed all of this to the, quote, dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini. It's pretty cryptic. I can see why he was a little paranoid.
Sure.
Another visitor to the house, so not the only time this happened, ostensibly looking for work, took the occasion to go around the house, like around the back of the house and look at stuff, and he warned George that a pair of fuse boxes back there would, quote, cause a fire someday. George was puzzled by the observation since he had the house rewired when an electric stove was installed. So that's what he had the electrician out for earlier. But again, the whole house is not going to be rewired for a stove, just the one part of the house. And the local electric company had said afterwards that it was safe. Okay, but that's just them saying that. I'm sorry, I cannot like hang my whole hat on that guy being right.
Yeah.
In the weeks before Christmas that year, George's older sons had also noticed a strange car parked along the main highway through town, and the people in it would watch the younger Sodder children as they returned from school. There's like fishy business going on. Oddly enough, among the jurors at the coroner's inquest for the children's death was the man who had threatened George that his house would be burned down and his children would be destroyed. So that insurance salesman was allowed on the jury.
Wait, that's so weird.
Yeah, the guy who said, what you said about Mussolini is going to make your house burn down and your children get destroyed. Now this makes his opinion slightly less credible, don't you think?
Yeah.
If he had done anything and he got to sit on that jury, he would, of course, be like, yes, electrical fire. Bye. And they didn't even think to find him afterwards. They were like, nah, it's fine. Okay. So as time marched forward and spring approached, the Sodders, as they had said they would, planted flowers in the lot where they had put all the dirt down, and Jennie did tend to this garden for the rest of her life. But instead of news of this tragedy dying down, the case just got stranger and stranger. Because, of course, there's no resolution that satisfies people, so they're just going to keep talking.
Mm-hmm.
Further developments in early 1946 reinforced the family's belief that the children they were memorializing might in fact still be alive somewhere. What was that evidence? Well, let's see. Quote, the driver of a bus that passed through Fayetteville late Christmas Eve said that he had seen some people throwing balls of fire at the house. Could we confirm this, or do we have the name of this guy? No. It's just something somebody said to tip the police or something, you know. But a few months later, when all the snow from that winter had melted, because it's pretty snowy there, little Sylvia found a small, hard, dark green rubber ball-like object in the brush nearby. She brought it to her parents. George, recalling his wife's account of a loud thump on the roof, remember she woke up to the thump, said that this green thing looked like a pineapple bomb or some other incendiary device used in combat. The family later claimed that, contrary to the fire marshal's conclusion that they thought the fire had started on the roof, although by then there was nowhere to prove it because there's no roof. Did anyone else see this object and confirm that it was a pineapple bomb or anything like that? No, they did not. What even is a pineapple bomb? Well, I'm glad you asked. Leslie, what do you think it is?
Well, I don't know why it would be green unless it went bad or something. But
it was unripe. It's dark green.
That's true. And I guess maybe the cold kept it that way. But I'm thinking it's like a pineapple.
Wait, so you're thinking it's an actual pineapple, like the fruit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like it would be a pineapple. Okay. And then they like hollowed it out.
Sure.
Maybe threw some alcohol in there.
Yep.
A cloth and lit it on fire.
So it's a very tropical Molotov cocktail.
Yeah, maybe a little...
Like a cruise ship umbrella of death. Boy, I sure do wish that's what it was. It is wild that you thought that. I was trying to keep a very straight face, but that's very funny.
Okay, I didn't think it was a cocktail, but I was thinking that maybe it was a bomb made out of, like, I don't know, like a science-y thing, like made out of a
like
pineapple.
A potato gun. You thought it was a pineapple.
Yeah,
okay.
Like maybe they opened it up and threw something in there, and something with the pineapple created something that
pineapples are combustible, maybe.
I don't know, like they're
very acidic.
And maybe the acidity like I don't know, generated some kind of energy in there that
I really like this theory.
I don't know. I just thought it was something like in school and somebody threw it and it was more like a prank, but then it hit like
just right.
Yeah.
That's great. I thought it was just a bigger bomb, like slightly like the size of a pineapple maybe, or perhaps it was compared to a pineapple because the explosion created a fountain of flames like the top of a pineapple. But no, we're both wrong. And I'm surprised you were wrong because that sounds right.
Yeah.
No, it's just a hand grenade. Just like a typical stock image of a hand grenade. It looks like the skin of a pineapple. Yeah, that textured outside of a hand grenade.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that.
Why do they have to call it a pineapple bomb?
I don't know.
This damn slang in the 1940s.
They just needed to dress it up to be something fun, I guess. I don't know. And again, like this is a rubber ball a little kid found. No one saw it. Nobody can confirm or deny it. But people were like, oh, yeah, I like this theory. Because the public loves the crazy theory. It's their favorite thing. Now,
but it was just a rubber ball?
I don't know.
Oh.
Nobody saw it. We don't have reports of the police looking at it. We don't have fire investigators examining it.
It was just little...
He just said, my daughter found this, and I think it's the remains of a hand grenade.
Okay.
And they were like, okay. That's it.
And also, nobody else knows about this insurance salesman saying this stuff to him, right?
I will tell you when that gets revealed. It does get revealed to them eventually, not just quite yet.
Okay.
But that to me just proves that they like really didn't vet the jury or have any honest people on it. Because if you're appropriately vetting your jury, you're going to know that this man had an interaction or had differing beliefs or whatever, and you're not going to let them be the judge of what happened to these kids.
I'm also surprised that people had an issue with him not liking Mussolini, because I didn't think that they liked
didn't either.
Mussolini.
To be quite honest, I didn't either, but the people in this area did.
Okay.
So, okay. But the public liked the bomb theory. And as you can imagine by now, the newspapers had latched onto this story for dear life, and they loved any and all theories that seemed to point to a big ol' scandal. So, of course, there's more. Let's let the Smithsonian elaborate a little this time. Quote, then came the reports of sightings. Of course there were sightings. Their pictures were out there in the world. Their names were out there in the world.
I thought we were talking about aliens.
No.
Okay.
Get out of here. No, people are going to see the kids. This happens every time a police sketch or anything is released. It's, I forget the name of it. It's a very specific psychological effect where you see, like you hear a song and then you hear it everywhere. It's the same thing. One woman claimed to have seen the missing children peering out of a passing car while the fire was in progress. A woman operating a tourist shop between Fayetteville and Charleston, West Virginia, some 50 miles northwest, said she saw the children the morning of the fire. She said, quote, I served them breakfast. There was a car with a Florida license plate at the tourist court, too. A woman at the Charleston Hotel saw the children's photos in a newspaper and said she had seen 4 out of the 5 of them a week after the fire, in a statement to local authorities. She said, quote, the children were accompanied by 2 women and 2 men, all of Italian extraction. Hate that phrase. Extraction? They were just pulled out of Italy and dropped in there. I do not remember the exact date. However, the entire party did register at the hotel and stayed in a large room with several beds. They registered about midnight. I tried to talk to the children in a friendly manner, but the men appeared to be hostile and refused to allow me to talk to these children. One of the men looked at me in a hostile manner. He turned around and began talking rapidly in Italian. There is no other version of Italian. It is all rapid. Immediately, the whole party stopped talking to me. I sensed that I was being frozen out, and so I said nothing more. They left early the next morning. This was, of course, investigated and never panned out, obviously. And also, if this was just 2 families traveling with their kids and someone was like, let me talk to your children, I'd be like, no.
Right.
I would also freeze her out. Get the fuck away from my children. So, now, feeling that this mystery was a little too big for them to untangle on their own, and the cops couldn't or wouldn't help them, the Sodders turned to a private investigator named C.C. Tinsley to look into the case. What a good private eye name.
I know, for sure.
Private Eye C.C. Tinsley.
Yeah.
Should be a radio drama. They informed the family that the insurance salesman who had threatened George over his anti-Mussolini sentiments had been on the coroner's jury. So that's what this investigator turned up. He's like, well, there was one a-hole on the jury you're not going to like to hear about. He also learned of rumors around Fayetteville that despite his report to the Sodders that no remains had been found in the ashes, Fire Chief Morris had actually found a heart, a human heart, which he later put in a metal box and secretly buried. Why? Well, I don't know, but that's new, isn't it?
Sure.
Apparently, non-truck driving Chief Morris had, quote, confessed to a local minister that he did this. Why not tell a minister? Who in turn, this minister confirmed this to George Sodder. He's like, yeah, this guy said it to me. I can't come and tell you because it's confession and I'm a priest, but it happened. George.
But he can't say that it did.
Apparently he can.
This is a bad priest.
Apparently because they are asking about it, he's like, yeah, that did happen, but like you told me first, so I'm just confirming it. I'm not like tattling. I don't know. I don't know why he suddenly can talk about it and he didn't before. George and P.I. Tinsley went to Chief Morris and they were like, hey dude, did you bury a box with a heart? And he said, yeah, I did do that. And I will show you where I did it. And so he was like, I did it here. And they dug it up and it was there.
What?
Yeah. They found a metal box with something gross inside. Like a lump of grossness. That's all you can tell after that much time, right? So they're like, what the fuck, dude? And they take the box and the thing to a local funeral director. I like to think it was the same one that was like, there would be bones. Hello.
Yeah.
And the funeral director's like, okay, fine, I'm going to look at this fucking weird, gross thing. And they do for a little while, and then they come back and they're like, that is not a heart, and it's not human, and it's not old or burned. It is a fresh beef liver, and it has never seen a fire.
I'm so lost. What is up with this cheese?
Why? I know he's the worst. Now, I don't know if you know this, Leslie, though, that a fresh beef liver is very different than a long ago burned human child heart. They're not the same at all.
No.
Quote, later, more rumors circulated around Fayetteville that Fire Chief Morris had afterwards admitted that the box with the liver had indeed not come from the fire originally, and that he had supposedly placed it in there in the hopes that the Sodders would find it and then be like, oh, that's part of my child. Case closed. And just be satisfied and have it be the end.
What is wrong with this cheese?
I wish I could tell you, but it is wild. He can't do anything, and then he does crazy shit. It seems like maybe that was well-intentioned, but it also seems like it's super weird and like he just wanted to be right and not guilty.
Wait, that's such a weird thing to do. So then he definitely was in confession, and he was like, you're allowed to tell this one. Like, if anybody talks to you.
Yeah, that's what it would mean, that he was like...
Or no, like, I bet you... Because, like, why would that investigator even think to go to that priest? Like, that priest definitely was like, let me talk to you. Let me tell you what's up. Because that chief was just like,
or
giving you...
Well, because he said he followed rumors, which means the priest didn't talk to George Sodder, but he didn't talk to nobody.
Right.
Or like, Fire Chief told more people than just the priest.
Yeah.
He was like, oh, I was at confession and I told the priest. And so eventually it trickled down to the investigator that he should talk to this priest, and he does.
I only had to do 5 Hail Marys.
Right. And he was like, that's just a beef liver. It's fine.
But I'm glad you found it. You feel better now?
And he honestly thought no one would go, oh, that's a beef liver.
Like, it wasn't even a heart.
It wasn't even a heart. You couldn't have found a heart. You went all the way to the... He couldn't go to the butcher shop. He just went to the supermarket, apparently. Like, what? It doesn't even look like a heart. A heart looks more like a pineapple bomb, to be quite honest. Yeah. So anyway, George is beginning to lose his shit at this point, and I don't blame him, because so are we. This is crazy. On one occasion, he saw a magazine photo of a group of young ballet dancers in New York City, and he thought that one of them looked exactly like his missing daughter, Betty. But it wasn't enough for him that she just looked like Betty. He decided that it must be Betty. So he's seeing them everywhere. To prove it, he drove all the way to the young ballerina's school.
Oh, boy.
And repeatedly demanded to see her himself. But the school, of course, refused to let that happen because that wasn't Betty Sodder. It was that girl. Now, I get why he would want to think it was her, because not only would she be alive, she'd be a beautiful little ballerina in New York City, which is like, great. But again, we can confirm that that was not her.
Man, what if the story took a wild turn and he, like, took that girl and she to, like, live with the Sodder family?
In the rubble of their home with a beef liver in a metal box.
And she's just there like, I am Betty.
Now I am Betty. And then she kills the fire chief in retribution. Yeah. This could be great.
Yeah.
None of that happened, but if we wrote it. But feeling out of options, George then tried to enlist the help of the FBI, which, like, they should have done in the first place, first of all. He said he considers this to possibly be a kidnapping, and it could be international. They don't know. So FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover personally responded to his letter because this case is very high profile. But he didn't respond in the way anyone would have liked. He said, quote, although I would like to be of service, the matter related appears to be of a local character and does not come within the investigative jurisdiction of this bureau. If the local authorities requested the bureau's assistance, he added he would have, of course, directed agents to assist, but the Fayetteville police and fire departments refused to do so. They would not ask the FBI for help. So the FBI said, we won't help, just you. What? Why wouldn't you call the FBI? Like, why wouldn't you call them? You're the Fayetteville Police Department. You're a town of 1,500 people in West Virginia and clearly are ill-equipped to handle the investigation. Why wouldn't you call them?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you call them immediately, let alone years later? They didn't. And this led a lot of people to believe, and now I'm starting to believe them, that there was some kind of cover-up happening with that fire chief. That maybe he didn't want the FBI to discover. Oh, God. I just think he didn't want people to know he was inept. I think he was like, this is what happened. Nobody could have helped him. Oh, well. Because he did not do what he should have done in any way. Then, quote, in August of 1949, George was able to persuade Oscar Hunter, a Washington, D.C. pathologist, to supervise a new search through the dirt at the house site. So he's like, dig a hole. What's happening? And I would have been like, I am so sorry I put that dirt there. I shouldn't have, but I was in a really bad situation and nobody would do anything. But whatever. So this guy comes in and does a pretty thorough search, and he finds artifacts from the children. He finds stuff, including a dictionary that had belonged to them. So stuff did survive this fire, and some coins. Metal always survives. Like I said, like fires rarely just reduce everything to powder. Stuff survives. And they found several small bone fragments, and they were determined to be human vertebrae. Okay. Now we're getting somewhere, right? The bone fragments were sent to Marshall T. Newman, a specialist at the Smithsonian Institute. Now we're also getting somewhere where science actually lives. They confirmed they were lumbar vertebrae, and they were all from the same person. And they said that, quote, since the transverse recesses are fused, the age of this individual at death should have been 16 or 17 years. Now, given this age range, it was not very likely that these bones were from any of the 5 missing children, considering the oldest, Maurice, had been 14 at the time. But aging bones is far from an exact science. We know that. We know that directly from the mouth of a medical examiner.
Sure.
And any medical examiner will tell you that. And the report did allow, they said that the vertebra of a boy his age sometimes could have been more advanced and appear at the lower end of that range.
I mean, they were working like men. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but that's growth. It's just how much they grow and your vertebrae fuse. But George said, okay, well, this means that's not my son. And maybe he said that for good reason. Because Dr. Newman added that the bones showed no sign at all of exposure to flames. Further, he agreed that it was very strange that those bones were the only bones found, since a wood fire of such short duration should have left full skeletons of all the children behind. The report concluded that the vertebra had instead most likely come, hold on to your hat, from the dirt that George had used to bulldoze the site.
Oh, no.
So those bones were in the fucking dirt.
So who were they?
That's what I'm saying. It leads me to ask, who did they belong to and where was that dirt from? Did you just get dirt from anywhere?
Next week on We Would Be Dead.
I know, right? The mystery of the bone dirt. But thank God, Tinsley supposedly confirmed at a later date that the bone fragments had come from a cemetery in nearby Mount Hope.
Okay.
But nobody could still explain why they had been taken from there.
Oh my God.
Or how they came to be at the fire site. They're like, they don't know why they were in that dirt. Nobody dug up.
That's where that dirt came from?
It must have been, or somebody dumped the bones from that cemetery in other dirt. Whose bones were they?
Or why were they taking dirt from a cemetery
or why
to
was
build a beautiful garden?
I don't know. All of this is too...
It's too much.
And nobody was like, I have to find this out. They were like, meh.
And again, someone check in on the chief.
The chief was like, I pocketed them and I threw them in there. After that beef liver stuff. He's just grave robbing shit. Oh my God.
He's unhinged.
He is. You're right, man. It could have been him. I didn't even think of it when I was writing that, but man. Oh.
Like, what an elaborate play.
I know, dude. It's
okay. The bones. Okay.
Instead of just digging down real deep, you could have just kept going, but no, he did not. He did not do that. Okay. The Smithsonian returned the bone fragments to George Sodder in September of 1949. Why would you give them back to him? I don't know.
Well, I guess maybe okay.
They were on his land.
And I'm glad he gave them back because maybe he was also thinking like in the future, maybe we can get more information on them or something.
I wrote this a little while ago, but I'm pretty sure he does the right thing. So, according to his records, their current location is unknown. And that's all we know, I guess. That's all we know about that. Okay. No, I guess he doesn't do anything. They just give him to George Sodder, and then we don't know where it went from there. I like to think in my heart that George Sodder was like, I know they came from a cemetery. I'm going to just bring them back there and leave them at rest or something. What could he do? He can't forensically investigate who those bones are. The police should have frickin' kept them and waited till they could test them to find out who they came from.
Right.
Nope, they didn't do that at all. Quote, after that, the West Virginia legislature did hold 2 hearings on the case in 1950. And afterwards, Governor Okie L. Pattison, and State Police Superintendent W.E. Burchett told the Sodders that the case was hopeless and closed it at a state level. The FBI decided that maybe it did have jurisdiction to invest it as a possible kidnapping after all, but then dropped the case after 2 years following fruitless leads. Nobody is doing good.
No.
Not one person.
No.
But of course we aren't done.
No.
Why would we be? The Sodder family was not able to give up hope, though, because they hadn't been given a good explanation, and then every so often they get a weird freaking lead.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as they were concerned, the police and the FBI and the fire department and the investigators hadn't been any help to begin with.
They're in cohorts.
Exactly.
Cahoots.
They're cohorts in cahoots.
They're cohorts in cahoots.
Yeah. So the Sodders had flyers printed up with the pictures of the children on them. And the flyer stated that they offered a $5,000 reward, which shortly after printing them would double to $10,000, which at the time was like $1 billion. And they offered this in exchange for any information that would have settled the case for even just one of their children. So, of course, this turned up leads because people are going to say shit when they see that. In 1952, first, though, they also put up a billboard on the site of the house and another along Route 60 near Ansted with the same information. Now, this billboard had the photos of all the children, the reward sum, phone numbers, and like, this is what happened. We think these children disappeared. If you find them, call this. Okay. And this is a practice that many victim families still use today. Billboards are still used frequently in trying to locate missing people. And here are all the sightings that drug up. Quote, the woman who ran a Charleston, West Virginia hotel claimed to have seen the children approximately a week afterwards. Quote, oh, wait, no. I guess this is when the woman who said Italian extraction people came forward. I have it in 2 places in this case, which I'm sorry about. So they get this information that like a family was, she was like, it was 2 men and 2 women and they spoke rapid Italian and then they left. And at this point, this story is released to the world. I think this is where this was reported. I'm sorry to have said it was earlier, but this case is reported everywhere and that story is at all points in it. But at this point, that story is released to the world. Everybody hears that story, which means everybody in the world is like, oh, it's the mob.
Yeah.
Of course they did. Of fucking course they did. That's what it sounds like if you're just on the outside and you fully believe that those children were the Sodder children.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody except the investigators, they didn't think it was the mob because they don't consider this woman's story to be credible at all. She had first seen photos of the children just 2 years after the fire, 5 years before she came forward. So yes, this did happen later. I'm sorry I had confused it at one point. The Sodder family and the older Fayetteville residents, quote, theorized that the Sicilian mafia was trying to extort money from George and that the children may have been taken by someone who knew about the planned arson and said they would be safe if they left the house. Only half the children, mind you. And they thought that perhaps they had taken them back to Italy. And if the children had survived all those years and were aware that their parents and siblings had survived too, the family thought that they may have avoided contact in order to keep themselves from harm.
No.
But why?
Yeah.
There's no ransom note, no further extortion, no gain from the fire, no receipts to let George know that they did what they did for a reason. That's not really the mob style.
No, it's not the mob style. I have no idea what the mob style is, though. Mm-mm.
No, of course not.
No. I don't even know that the mob, that's not a thing.
No, of course not. But I can tell you that it's highly unlikely that the mob did this and also had someone that was like, but the children, and ran in and got half of the children and said, come with me to Italy.
Also, there was like a war. They were just going to be like boating across the waters. Like there was like
the war
shit
was over.
At that time?
Mm-hmm.
But wasn't their son at war?
No. He hadn't been released to come home yet. He had been in the war, but he couldn't get home by Christmas. He was overseas and couldn't
Okay.
I don't know. But the war was over. But still, what? Why? What would they have to gain doing that? Why would they do that?
Yeah. No, they would have knocked some knees out first. That's if the mafia was a thing.
And also, of course, they wouldn't have, no one would have done this giant act of retribution without saying this was revenge. Because no one knew it was. No one was like, oh, man, they did this to us. We better give them their money. They just went, oh, a random crime.
Yeah.
So it didn't serve any of the intended possible purposes of something like that. And if they were extorting money from George, why, how, and where was the money? You can usually trace missing money.
Right.
And at this point, George has done every fucking thing under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
If he had given the mafia money, why wouldn't he have said, guys, I think I know what might have happened?
Right.
Not even a private, nobody could follow up on that. That's just like but the Sodders are like, oh, we think it was the mob.
Right, because I feel like the private investigator, Tinsley, would have like sat him down and been like, George.
You got to tell me, bro.
You know. We know. I know.
Yeah.
Sup. It's not a beef liver.
It's not a beef liver, man.
Has nothing to do with that.
I know, man. I don't know. I think that they were also kind of quiet about this theory. I mean, it was definitely floated around for a while, but I don't think they really told the whole world that they definitely thought that's what happened until after George died.
Okay.
But like, I feel that George would not have kept that secret.
Yeah.
He had literally nothing to lose.
Yeah.
Like, what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so to recap, the theories are the fire started with wiring, the children died in the fire and burned up. Or the fire was arson and the children were kidnapped. And there were many ways and reasons how they could have been kidnapped, but no whys. No one ever said why they only kidnapped some of the children or what they did with them. But that's a theory. There is a third theory that literally nobody likes, and that is that the children burned the house down themselves and ran away.
That doesn't. No.
It doesn't check out anywhere. They're like, maybe their family was awful and abused them. And they're like, there is no evidence anywhere that any of that happened.
Or they accidentally burned it down.
Maybe. And just they ran away.
Well, maybe they went to try to get a hold of the police chief.
Where did they go? Where are they then?
And that wasn't helpful.
Where did they go?
He probably answered the door and was just like, I'm not the chief. Goodbye.
He took them all and burned them in a fire.
Yeah, and then they were heading back and saw the fire, and they were like, "Oh shit,
we better go to Italy.
Go.
Let's call the mob. They'll take us with them,
or somewhere else." And then the police chief was like, "I'm not gonna say I saw those kids.
Definitely not. But I will do a lot of other really weird stuff.
Maybe that broke him.
Maybe. Hey, man, it's just as good as some of the theories that we have because none of them really track. And I think that's all of them. Leslie, did you come across anything else in your studies? Probably not, right?
No, I absolutely did.
Oh, you did?
I sure did,
Please
Holly.
help us.
And I think we're going to wrap it up here. Oh, okay?
I sure do hope so. I think you found conclusive evidence.
All right, buckle up, Holly, because I have got more than a theory for you.
Give it to me.
3 words.
Yes.
Mold.
Oh.
Circus.
Oh.
Aliens.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
You know I like mold theories and I love the circus.
Yeah.
I fucking hate aliens.
I know it sounds crazy, but stick with me for a second because we got something here. Let's start with the mold. Their house was old. It was probably damp and it was heated by coal, which can trap moisture and create a perfect environment for black mold. Now, black mold isn't just gross, it can actually mess with your brain. We know this.
We do know this.
We know this. We're talking paranoia, hallucinations, bad judgment, stuff that makes you see and believe things that aren't real.
100% yes.
And our listeners will remember our coverage of the Los Feliz murder house, which, if you haven't listened, spoiler alert, it was mold, allegedly.
So I firmly believe that it was mold that drove that guy crazy.
Yeah, allegedly. So imagine George Sodder, already a passionate guy with strong opinions about politics, breathing that in for years. He could have been losing touch with reality without anyone realizing. Maybe he started thinking someone was out to get him.
Maybe.
And his paranoia spiraled out of control. What if that night the fire was no accident? Maybe George, in a mold-induced haze, set the fire himself, thinking he was protecting his family from some imaginary threat.
Honestly, it makes as much sense as like a lot of other theories.
But wait.
Okay.
Then we have the 5 kids that don't make it out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
What if they were never in the house, right? That's
the
a
going
big
theory. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So What if the kids were lured away by someone promising them a life of adventure?
Okay, I'm with you.
Maybe the circus. It was pretty big back then.
It was.
And to kids, it probably seemed glamorous. Traveling the country, performing, living a totally different life. I mean, these kids were stuck on this farm with their parents. There were so many of them. And the older ones, you know, they were probably just like, oh, this is my life. And some of the younger ones were like, I don't want this to be my life forever.
Lewis was like, I need to put my feet up. Jesus Christ.
I just want to be a dancer. I just want to twirl around.
I mean, I would want to be a dancer.
And they were like, I just want to like play with lions and walk with the elephants.
No. Oh, no.
I don't know. Anything. And maybe life wasn't as good at home, you know? Like maybe their parents were really strict and they were like, I want to be able to do what I want. And kids can do what they want at the circus.
Kind of.
Okay?
Okay.
So maybe someone connected to the circus was like hanging around the area and they saw an opportunity.
Or they saw them running out of a burning house and they were like, hey, kid, come with me.
Or, I mean, they were all playing outside before and they were just like, hey there, kids, it's Christmas Eve. What's going on?
Yeah, man.
You know what? We could just be doing circusy things.
Again, the fact that someone lured them away from home and took them is one of the theories. So it could be. You never know.
I mean, this also could have happened on a different day.
Sure.
And they just knew like Christmas Eve. And like maybe they found out that the circus was like these people were just traveling through town. And they were like, we're continuing on our travels like this night. Like we'll be out of here. We won't be here on Christmas. And they were like, this is our last chance.
Yeah.
Right? And so they were like, Mom, we're just going to stay up and play.
Mm-hmm. Maybe.
And, yeah. So maybe maybe they were never there. Maybe they didn't even know what was going to happen.
That's the nicest of all theories. Because that means they went to the circus and the fire, they didn't even know what happened.
They didn't even know what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now.
Yes.
We bring in the aliens.
No, let's not bring in the aliens ever.
Because a couple of things. There's a few things we could tie this in with.
No.
So what if the fire wasn't entirely George's fault or even an accident? What if something completely out of this world was involved? Picture this.
No.
George Mould's altered mind starts playing tricks on him. And he starts seeing lights in the sky.
No.
Maybe real, maybe hallucinated.
No.
He's freaking out, thinking it's some kind of government or political attack. Mussolini is coming to get him.
Oh, God.
And that's when the fire starts. Meanwhile, those lights in the sky, maybe they're UFOs. What if the aliens decided to take the 5 missing kids? What if they saw them just a fire started and then they saw these other kids running around and they were up in the sky and they were just like, oh, this is fun. And they just think they
like rescued them?
They either rescued them or that was just one of those like coincidental things. Like the kids were doing their own thing, running away to the circus, and the aliens were just like,
oh, wow, we're combining all of it. Okay.
In the woods. Let's just take them. And then maybe the aliens later were just like, ooh, I think we did something weird. This was not good.
No.
There's a whole situation down there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's beef liver
we thought we were just taking some kids. We can't just place them back now.
Yeah, now people think stuff.
Yeah. They also could have saw the chaos of the fire and thought, like, this is a good opportunity to take some humans.
I hate that. I hate all of that.
So it's not like anyone would question it, you know, because everyone already assumed that the kids either died in the fire or they just disappeared.
Gonna get more
so there was no
tomorrow. Yeah. Okay.
So if you put it all together, we have mold messes with George's mind, leading to a fire, whether he caused it intentionally or not. The kids may be fed up with their home life, or just the idea of a glamorous life with the circus, and maybe they were like, we'll tell Mom and Dad, and they'll come see us. And they either ran off to join the circus, or were straight up abducted by aliens. No. Either way, I think we got it covered.
You did some work.
Yeah.
You did some hard work.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this could have passed.
Now, I almost always think mold could be a possibility.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to blame poor George.
You wouldn't be blaming George. It's the mold.
I know, it's the
Nobody
mold.
goes after the mold.
Well, you know, it's true they don't. Or it was 22-year-old flatfoot non-army. You don't know. He was in the house doing the same work.
Maybe Joe came back.
Or
war-torn.
Pretty sure that didn't happen. But you know what?
You don't know.
There's no proof of, like, anything. And what you proved more than anything else with all of that is that anyone could have just taken factors, drawn them together, and put forth a theory. And the police who didn't investigate it would have been as good as anything else.
I think if the chief was here, he would say.
He would agree with you 150%.
Yeah, that.
Yep. And that's another thing you just proved. That anyone who presented a theory like that, the chief wasn't going to poke holes in it. He was just going to agree because it was better than him looking dumb.
He did that all himself.
Yeah, he really sure truly did. He did it every day.
Oh my God, this is miserable.
It is miserable. But, like, people did exactly what you just did. Yeah. They did things like, well, I saw him in a car. I saw people talk Italian in a hotel, so it must have been them. Like, that's what happened.
You mean they did their research, Holly?
Yes, and formed very logical theories. That is exactly what they did. But still, you did just prove, whether intentional or not, a very valuable point.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And that thing, that about wraps it up.
Validation.
I'm going to give you all the validation. But whether mold-addled or not, at this point his head was clear, and George still couldn't be deterred because, after all, these are his children. You're never going to stop.
No.
Not until the day he died. So here's a little roundup on the end of George's continued efforts. George followed up leads in person. He just traveled around the country and followed up every lead he got. And there were many of them. He traveled to the areas from where the tips came from. So a woman from St. Louis, Missouri, claimed that Martha was being held at a convent there. Martha was 12. A bar patron in Texas claimed to have overheard two other people making incriminating statements about a fire that happened on Christmas Eve in West Virginia some years before. Neither one of those theories panned out. But George went after him. When George heard later that a relative of Jennie's in Florida had children that looked similar to his, the relative had to prove that the children were his own before George was satisfied. So this poor guy had to be like, I swear to God, these are my children. But I don't blame George. I don't blame him, because a situation like this would drive any person to the brink. In 1967, George went to the Houston area to investigate yet another tip. A woman there had written to the Sodder family saying that Lewis had revealed his true identity to her one night after having too much to drink. And this is Lewis, who we have said was a seasoned old man for years. And I did not intend that, but that's kind of funny. She believed that he and Maurice were both living in Texas somewhere. However, George and his son-in-law, Grover Paxton, were unable to speak with her. Anonymous tip never revealed herself. Probably not true. Police there were able to help them find the two men that she had indicated, though, and they both denied to be these people. They're like, I am not them. I'm sorry. Paxton, the son-in-law, said years later that doubts about that denial, about these guys saying they weren't them, stayed in George's mind forever. He didn't really believe them. Now, the letters and phone calls kept coming in. There's more nut stuff, but there is one letter that they received that brought the Sodders what they thought, and what a lot of people think to be the most credible evidence that Lewis was still alive. One day, Jennie found in the mail a letter addressed to her. It was postmarked in Central City, Kentucky, with no return address. But inside, there was a picture of a young man around 30 years old with features that strongly resembled Lewis's, who would have been in his 30s by that time if he had survived. And on the back was written, Lewis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. LLIL boys, A90132 or 35. We do not know what any of that means. The family hired another private investigator to go to Central City and look into this, but he never reported back to the Sodders. He went there and just never came back, and they couldn't find him ever again afterwards.
Probably also joined the circus.
You never know. The picture, however, did end up giving them hope because they really thought it looked like Lewis, and he is very handsome.
He is, yeah.
Whew. They added it to the billboard. And they left Central City out of it, but they just said, we think he looks like this, basically. Because they didn't want people to go after, if this was Lewis, they didn't want anyone to go after him. And they put an enlargement of this picture over their fireplace. I know, it makes me really sad. George did, however, admit to the Charleston Gazette later the next year that the lack of information had been like hitting a rock wall. Quote, we can't go any further, he said, but nevertheless, he vowed to continue. Quote, time is running out for us, he admitted in another interview around the same time. Quote, "But we only want to know if they did die in the fire. We want to be convinced. Otherwise, we want to know what happened to them." George Sodder died in 1969. Jennie and her surviving children, except John, who never talked about the night of the fire ever again, except to say that the family should just accept what happened and move on with their lives. He's the only one that did not look into leads and conspiracy theories. He was like, this is what happened. We just have to accept it and go.
Yeah. So tough.
Yeah, but the rest of them continued to look for answers to their questions about the missing children's fate. After George's death, quote, Jennie stayed in the family home, putting up fencing around it and adding additional rooms. They never rebuilt the house on that property. It was their new home that they're talking about. For the rest of her life, she wore black in mourning and tended to the garden at the site of her former house. After her death in 1989, the family finally took the weathered billboard down. So when she died, they were like, we're not going to find them.
Yeah.
The surviving Sodder children, joined by their own children, continued to publicize the case and investigate leads. And there are still theories circulating the internet to this day. It's a very talked about situation. Quote, Sylvia Sodder Paxton, the youngest of the surviving Sodder siblings, remember little 3-year-old Sylvia, died in 2021. She was in the house on the night of the fire, which she says is her earliest memory. Ooh, that's rough. I was the last one of the kids to leave home, she recalled to the Gazette in 2013. She and her father often stayed up late talking about what might have happened. Quote, I experienced their grief for a long time. She believed that her siblings survived that night and assisted with efforts to find them and publicize the case. Her daughter said in 2006 that she promised my grandparents she wouldn't let the story die, and she would do everything she could. To this day, the internet, who loves a mystery, continues to muse on the disappearance of the Sodder children. As for me, I think they died quickly of smoke inhalation, and the unique conditions of the fire most likely did consume them. And then, through extremely ineffective investigation and a compromised site, there was little left of the five Sodder children, and it became almost impossible to find. So Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty could never properly be recovered. But that's just me.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Ugh,
that's the
I know.
story.
I do think that feels like the most likely of what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I also hope they joined a glamorous circus.
I mean, that's a lovely, lovely theory to put forth. It's the same kind of feeling that George must have had when he thought that one of them was a ballerina.
Yeah.
I get it. And also, we've said this before, and I'll say it again, and I'll never stop saying it. I will never judge a family for insisting that something else happened in the grisly death of their children.
Mm-hmm.
I will never condemn anybody for continuing to have hope or wondering or wanting to investigate something further that they just cannot rationalize or wrap their brains around because the grief is too much. I get it. It makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I am way on the other side, somewhere else, not related to them, so I can look at certain science and say certain things. But could they do that? Absolutely not. And the fact remains that nobody gave them a firm explanation.
Well, and then there was just weird shit
all over the place.
So I get it. I get that would be confusing because it does feel confusing.
It does feel confusing. And the person that was supposed to handle their case did half of the shady things.
Yeah.
The fire chief really fucked this up, I think, in my opinion. Like, had people responded faster and done better and not compromised any of the site, I think it would have been easier to say, this was an awful, horrible thing that occurred.
Yeah.
But this is it. We have to just take it. But the cop was like, I don't know. Or the fire chief. He was just like, well, whatever.
Yeah.
Moving on. They signed death certificates too quickly. They didn't investigate enough. They gave them no assurances. They didn't further investigate the wiring thing. They couldn't do much. And then they just didn't do much.
Yeah.
The fact that somebody who dug up the site years later found stuff, they may not have found their bones, but they did find things that existed in the house.
Right.
Meant that they really didn't look that hard in the first place.
Yeah.
You found a dictionary and coins and buttons? They said they found nothing.
Right.
Definitely it wasn't nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that is what most modern forensic professionals say about this case. They say, listen, like they didn't look in the beginning. If they had looked in the beginning and dug all the way down into that basement rubble, they probably would have found evidence of the children's remains. They just didn't do it. And now it's too late.
And that could take like weeks or months to get
Absolutely it could. That's the rubble of an entire home packed into a basement.
But he had covered it like a week later.
5 days later. Not even a week.
Yeah.
because he had been treated so poorly and given such little hope. Sense. It does make sense. I mean, they were just like, this is it, the end. Wife and his wife couldn't look at it.
Yeah.
I get it. I don't pretend to think that was a decision that should have been made, but he also shouldn't have been able to do that. That site should have been secured. Should have been shut down and secured.
Yeah.
He shouldn't have been allowed to bulldoze it. That's nuts.
Yeah.
Anyway, that is the story of the missing Sodder children.
Yikes.
We don't know where they went.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, they are still on the grounds of that, where the house burned down.
Ugh.
Yep.
Toast.
Yep. Toast. Obviously to Maurice Sodder, Martha Lee Sodder, Louis Sodder, Jennie Irene Sodder, and Betty Dolly Sodder, who we will never be able to find, but were sorely missed. And to the rest of the Sodder family, who went through hell and back for what I feel was not a very good reason.
Yeah.
And I really can't think of anybody else. Maybe the motorist that drove by and actually called the cops.
Yeah.
That's pretty good Samaritan.
Yeah.
To them. And if we had the misfortune of sleeping soundly in an attic bedroom in a house that was not built to withstand a fire, we would be dead.
Thank you for listening to the We Would Be Dead podcast. Hit subscribe now to never miss an episode. Rate and review our show on iTunes. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Would Be Dead Pod. And join our Facebook group to discuss the podcast and more.
All I want for Christmas is someone to rub these damn feet.
I gotta put up my dogs.